Welcome back to yet another one of your Re-Educated podcast. Today we have an extremely special guest, Parth Phalke. He is the founder of Srot, an organization that helps rural students become independent learners, helping them become emotionally, financially, and intellectually independent. How are you doing today?
All well, yeah.
I really tried to write that out
Yeah.
so clearly, but I was like writing it in cursive and then it's too dark in my room to read. And I was like, no, I got to the last word. I was like, what is that? I can't read it. That's the benefit of writing slowly. Just slow and steady wins the race. But how are you?
Oh, fantastic. We finally have some rain and snow, yeah. So it's good.
Yeah, it's
Been
been
waiting for
three
this for
months.
all of winter, yeah.
It's been 3 months since I was able to be around you and all the kids and just being
Yeah.
in the Himalayas. I mean, first I want to, I feel like I even did this when in the last episode when we were talking about Sayadri, and I would
Hmm.
love if you could paint the picture of what the area that you live in even looks like. I feel like that's such a huge part of a lot of the work that you do. That
Hmm.
entire area is so beautiful. I'd love if you could paint that picture.
So we are actually in the hill districts of Himachal. So Himachal is typically split into the lower parts that are closer to um, the lower bits of Kangra district and that entire part, Pune side and all of that. And then you have Sirmaur and Kulu district and all, which are considered the hill districts. So we live in the Kulu district, in a place that has now become fairly well known, Tirthan. About 5, 10 years ago, hardly anybody knew it. Jibi was still fairly better known back then, but Tirthan has now picked up, and a lot of people come, tourists who want to essentially explore the peace and quiet. And uh, it's in the eco zone of the Great Himalayan National Park, so it's a buffer zone. A very beautiful place. You know, hills, mountains all around, forest, uh, fairly dense forest, so wildlife and all. We have seen leopards. We've heard stories of bear and this and that. So it's a very beautiful place. Very small villages, all spread all across the landscape, on hills and mountain tops, and isolated homes as well. So it's a very fascinating thing for people coming from outside to see how can a home be on a hillside or cliffside, literally all by itself, and people go up and down, fairly regularly. They have to come down to the road to collect things and go back up. And they're very hardy people. The society that we are in is in transition, going from a rural, traditional way of life to something, um, let's say, moving towards so-called development, but basically aiming for progress, better opportunities, better education, more livelihood, and so on. So it'll take some time for them to figure out how to do that. But the desire is there, among the younger people, particularly among the women, the girls. Girl students seem far more driven to study and do things than the rest. Uh, so it's a very fascinating place. One can see, fairly strong traditional social structures. Um, Schools are there everywhere, but the quality of education is questionable. Mm, Himachal, according to government data, is probably the third or fourth best performing state, and still on ground, the condition that we see is far from um, you know um, admirable. So there's quite a bit of struggle there. It has consequences for the local people here and their lives and so on. So on the whole, the I guess every place has its own balance, uh, with the abundant beauty and nature and, in some sense, purity of things around us, that seems to be balanced with these other pain points, um, where locals are still trying to figure out and find answers to questions. And that's kind of where we come in, where we feel that it is important that from within the locals we develop um, individuals who are interested in doing some of these things and taking things forward for their own communities. So learn about how the world that they are likely to step into works, and try and do a better job of guiding their communities into it, so that they don't have to make necessarily all the same errors that every other place has made getting there.
Hmm. Yeah. And so, I mean, before we get into the education parts, I just wanted to tell the listeners that when I was staying here, one of the best parts is I would have this 30-minute walk to get to the school that you were previously at. And there's just this beautiful river that's just constantly always there, and the sound of it, and there's no like road. It's just kind of gravel, kind of, that you're just walking on.
Yeah.
And it seems in a lot of ways very untouched by quote unquote progression. And in that sense,
Yeah.
it was so beautiful and natural. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are even on this concept of progression, because I feel like it's something that a lot of people aim for and strive for, especially in areas that are quote unquote developing. But when you think about Tirthan Valley and its values and what it stands for, what does progression mean to you?
I think development or progress is understood in very narrow terms, right? The parameters have to be redefined, because you never only develop, you also deplete at the same time. And typically, both things happen, can happen in the same place. And because we seem to be very focused on what we perceive as development, we don't seem to realize very easily where the depletion seems to be occurring. So, in a place where the natural resource, forests and, the river and clean air and all, that is a primary resource. Um, Development will deplete that very resource, and people don't seem to realize this, or realize it enough to do something about it. Uh, so development then, or progress, perhaps needs to be defined a little differently, which is, we would like places, we as in even the locals would like these places to have better facilities, better access to resources, better access to education, networks, more livelihood. Uh, but the question is, in order to get that, do we really need to destroy what we have, or those things that have enriched our lives so far, uh, because they're not worthless? And it's exactly these places. The irony of it is that tourists come to these kind of places because of their natural beauty, the peace and quiet. Uh, and then, in the name of development, the very same things disappear, right? So, and so, can we try and give these areas and people who live here access to all of these things without them having to urbanize? Because that's essentially, I see that as a problem, where the idea in rural areas of development is to urbanize. We would like to be
Hmm.
like a bigger city, and being becoming like a city, or like an urban area, somehow seems to carry an aspirational value with it, um, uh, particularly among the younger generations. Um, and that's not necessary. I feel it is not necessary to urbanize. It is essential to, you know, um, to bring in certain things that constitute development and progress, but it's not important to urbanize. It is possible that we continue to live, in our own traditional homes. um, uh, if the roads can develop, and um, everybody can have access to water, and there is sewage treatment or waste disposal systems in place, and so on. If we can do that, I think that will be great. But then the demand for that has to come from locals, and for that the
Hmm.
locals really have to understand what progress or development, the way it is conventionally understood or defined, what it can do for the place they are living in. uh, you know that is where education comes in. If we can help them to think clearly and watch the world around them and become intellectually independent and also emotionally independent, uh, in such a way that they can think for themselves and not simply be influenced by somebody else's views, some of them will see what's happening and might be interested in, and also in a position to take a stand and try and have an effect on what's happening around them. Because without that,
Hmm.
it's a very strong current, it's a very strong pull towards becoming urban or having all kinds of things. We see people here buying SUVs. There's no place to park them. They don't even require them. Somebody I know, they sold some property and earned several lakhs, and within 2 weeks they had bought a car and just blown all of that money. It was like the desire to have things to show off that you are rich, or all of that. It's a whole mix of things, social status and this and that, where if young people understood what value really was and which things held that value, they would some of them would make different choices. And that's good enough, because if a few can make different choices, others will over time follow.
Hmm. Yeah, as you were speaking, one thing I was thinking about was in a lot of the regions in that area.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure even in the homestay that I was staying at, they
Mm-hmm.
didn't really have a proper like trash disposal system,
Yeah,
and a lot
yeah,
of the places don't. And so that is like a very unique, interesting selection of um,
yeah,
development that, like, I think a lot of people, maybe when they're thinking about development, that wouldn't have actually come first to mind because that may have been something they've
yeah,
always been around. And so
yeah.
one thing that's kind of making me think is, as soon as I came back to the US, one of the things that I noticed was this starkly different was how efficient everything is in this country. I mean, whether
Mm,
it's traffic, whether it's when you order something on the internet, whether it's
mm,
how get food on when you go to a restaurant, everything is just structured so well that there's
mm,
very little space for chaos. And so
mm.
chaos, but what I realized is chaos is what makes life in many ways enjoyable and fun, and it makes
Mm,
walking from one place to another a whole adventure, right? I mean,
yeah,
what
yeah.
ends up happening and understanding a part of development is efficiency, and efficiency
Mm,
is also often only created when you have like structure and you have routine. And so you don't have to be like, will the bus come on time? Like, okay, the bus will come
mm,
exactly at this time, there's no question. I know exactly when the bus is coming, when I'm getting there, how long it takes me to walk from there. There's much less space for randomness. And one thing curious is it possible to have this development without the urbanization part of it, which is putting in these places, these systems of structure? Like, how can one exist without the other?
mm. I think so. My experience suggests to me that when we speak of efficiency, we seem to be under the impression that everything has to be efficient. But I think we also need to strike the right balance between efficiency and or structure and chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Chaos is essential, and we must allow for that. We should
Definitely.
not be the desire to completely do away with chaos, or do everything that we can to minimize it, is born out of insecurity. And insecure people don't really contribute to progress. They just change the problems without solving anything. So you
Mm.
just, it's like a transmutation, right, from one problem to another. Because you can never be sufficiently, you can never be perfectly efficient, but there seems to be a drive to be so. Uh, so there are things where, when we look at life around us here in Tirthan, we see others as well as ourselves perfectly okay with a certain degree of chaos. We don't have a problem with. So while we would like the garbage to be picked up every day from outside our homes, in Banjar at least that happens. Where we stay, somebody comes and takes the garbage away and so on. In the rest of in Tirthan Valley or in Siraj Valley where GB and all that doesn't always happen. In fact, hardly happens. There is no waste disposal mechanism in place at all. But in Banjar, where that happens, and where I would expect that the lady comes and picks it up every day, I don't mind her doing it at 9 one day and 8 the other day. It doesn't matter, right? So that degree of flexibility and chaos is perfectly okay. Um, as long as the bus, is scheduled, whether it leaves at 10 or 10:15 doesn't really matter to life here. In a city, it might be a little different. But in this region, that doesn't really matter, and there's no need to enforce a certain sense of efficiency and structure in this particular aspect of life here in Tirthan, where we need discipline actually. And by structure, very often we seem to mean discipline. Where we require discipline is in the personal conduct of our lives. So if that happens, anyway, we will see that largely public life is orderly.
Mm.
If a teacher were to do his or her job as well as they could, that's a certain degree of discipline and commitment, right? Uh, Without having too many rules in place and too much structure, that then becomes tyrannical even for the teacher. Teachers stop, enjoying their work when all they are expected to do is just follow a structure. And
Mm.
that can lead to efficiency, but that doesn't lead to education, because learning by nature is chaotic. If I say that, in the next 2 months exactly this curriculum has to be taught and everybody must learn it, and then at the end of it they must take a test and they must score well or do well on the test, and if they don't, then there's something wrong. Nothing is wrong. Some people just take time to understand things or grasp things. Some people just are not interested in learning certain things, and then it is our job to find a way to get across to them and say, well, you know what, let's do it as well as we can. You don't have to be the best at it, that's fine, but do whatever you can. You don't have to
Mm.
enjoy it, but you don't have to dislike it either, right? And that's the
Yeah.
element of chaos. But in the interest of efficiency and order, we seem to forget that we are working with people, and we start sucking the humanness out of them, right? Where
Mm.
everybody is expected to function according to clockwork, and they're not machines, right?
Yeah.
And neither are we machines. There are times when we've scheduled something and we just cannot be there on time. And every time we make these errors, we expect others to accommodate and understand and so on. Uh, Whether or not that happens is a different question. But we at least expect that. I just hope that he says okay, right? But then when we are in charge, we don't somehow want to be okay with these things. So we do
Mm.
exactly the same things that are done to us and we disapprove of, but we don't learn from it. we dish out the same treatment, and that is all in interest of efficiency. And that's not progress, because progress would fundamentally, at least to me, uh, it means that people change. Things may or may not change as much, but people change. Fundamentally, something shifts. I remember a chat that I was having with a few students a few years ago, and I said, "Well, okay, we have better medicine, and we have better machines, and we have all these things and devices and this and that, great scientific revolution, whatever you call it. But I don't think we have progressed at all, because we haven't changed. Man is still the same. Right? Humanity is still the same. We are just as envious, and we are just as angry, and we fight, and given a chance we would do all kinds of terrible things to each other. People who have a chance very often do, and we are still unhappy about the same things. We are still very insecure, right? So what exactly has changed, apart from becoming more comfortable in our own life? Has anything else really changed? Have we fundamentally changed? And if that hasn't happened, all of this material progress will amount to nothing. Because while we have developed better medicines, we have also ruined our lifestyles. We eat complete garbage very often. And so it's not like people aren't dying, people are just dying of different causes. Right? So is that progress then?
Is definitely the real question. Yeah. Because I mean, if you don't mind me jumping in, I feel
Yeah,
like
please.
one of the things that, I've a lot of the people I've met,
Hmm.
I was telling them, I was like, one of the biggest lessons I had staying in Tirthan Valley was,
Hmm.
regardless of whether people were, had their bachelor's degree, it didn't even matter. I felt that there was a deep wisdom within everyone there. And it was simply through the types of food that they ate. I mean, everyone is
Hmm.
just so healthy. I mean, I just remember I
Hmm.
always tell my friend, I went on this quote unquote hike. It was a hike for me and it was challenging. And then I had told the
Hmm.
people I was living with I went on a hike and they were laughing because they were like, that was a hike. Like, we didn't know there were any hikes around here. But everybody, regardless of the age, it was
Hmm.
just normal to walk, kilometers on kilometers on a daily
Yeah,
basis. It
yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
something new or difficult. And so, in terms of, okay, do they know biologically all the reasons why walking is healthy for you? Maybe not. But did they walk
Yeah,
because it
yeah.
was something they need? Like, their lifestyle without the science behind it was already healthy. And it was just
Yeah.
fascinating to see. I was like, dang, it takes a lot of people a whole bunch of ergonomic chairs and this and that just to like figure out a way to be healthy, when a lot
Yeah.
of people who don't know the science behind it are already leading their lives in such a healthy way. It was fascinating
Hmm.
to me.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's that question of, I think I really liked what you said, where it was like progress is more on the development of the person than it is the development of their environment. And I think that's a really different take on what progress would be. But I like
Right.
that. So I'm very curious, connecting that now to some of the work that you do, which I'm really excited to share about. I first wanted to talk about the workshop that I
Hmm.
came to, and then we can get to the Srot
Sure,
organization
sure.
as a whole.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
this workshop, first, I think, is a very different style of education that I haven't seen. I haven't seen, a group of 10 or 12 kids go and stay somewhere that's different for a week or 10 days and fully just
Hmm.
dive into one concept. Not like, here's a camp for data science, or here's just a philosophical concept where they're just
Hmm.
sitting on it and then they're really learning from it. So perhaps for the listeners who may not have heard, I kind of covered this briefly in a different episode, but I would love to
Hmm.
hear from
Hmm.
you. What was the inception of this workshop, and what is the work? What do we do in the workshop?
The what we did in the workshop can be broadly classified or put into three parts. The first one was looking at the fact that everybody has emotion, right? And it's essential that one acknowledges that we have it, recognize what it is, and not judge it, because that's the only way you will slowly develop the ability to not let it interfere with everything you do. While it is perfectly normal and even desirable to experience whatever you experience every now and then emotionally, it is equally important that you don't let your emotions hijack every other aspect of your life.
Mm.
But they do often, and the reason is because we are not equipped and willing to acknowledge that they exist, right? So the moment somebody feels sad, very often people around them uh, will suggest that they do something to get over it, right? And I don't mean simply saying get over it. At some point everyone has to, sure, but it's like, okay, distract yourself, immediately do something. No, just sit with it. It's all right to be sad, right? It is okay to recognize that I am feeling sad and that something seems to have triggered it, and it's okay, right? It is okay
Mm.
to be upset, or it is okay to be annoyed. It is also okay to be happy. So let's not be too overjoyed just because you're happy. That's fine, right? um, as they say, this too shall pass, right? So experience it fully. When you're happy, experience it fully. When you're sad, experience it fully, but don't get carried away. But that one can only, one
Mm.
can recognize that that experience is playing itself out and acknowledge it for what it is, right? Without ascribing any value to it, in the sense that, oh, if this doesn't happen, I am going to be miserable, or if that doesn't happen, you know so there's no such thing, right? You don't need any specific thing to happen or not happen to be happy, right? We often find ourselves in completely unexpected, maybe certain undesirable situations, and we come away from that feeling uh, a very different emotion than we expected. Somebody going into a space that they think they're going to be very uncomfortable with, and come back thinking, I'm glad that I went there. And it was fantastic, right? So to associate certain things with certain emotions very strongly every time uh, does not allow us to experience what is, even emotionally.
Mm.
That doesn't, of course, mean that there are things that one would rather stay away from. Of course, that's true. And there are sources of trauma all around us, and certain people will be more affected by those, and it's better that they stay away from these things. Sure, we don't have to, just because it's better to not be too scared of things doesn't mean you throw yourself into the deep end every time. That's
Mm.
not what one is suggesting. But whatever it is that you experience, please, let's experience this fully. Acknowledge it, be okay with it, experience it fully. So that is one. The second part of it was looking at rational and critical thinking, and what prevents us from doing from thinking critically. There is also a slight difference between rational and critical thinking, right? So rational, as I would think of it, right? Rational thinking to me is the attempt that we make to think using reason or logic. But rational thinking need not always be critical, because if it is only something that we do using logic, we could easily use flawed logic, and then it's not rational anymore. In the sense that it's still using reason, and to that extent it is rational, but we have missed the critical points of the whole thing. We have missed certain
Mm.
parameters that we should have factored in and considered while we thought about that particular issue. So critical thinking is the ability to think using logic while thinking within certain critical parameters that are well established,
Mm.
right, beforehand. Rational thinking is just the ability to think using reason, but reason could be flawed. uh, and it is important that we understand what flawed reasoning can be. So for example,
Mm.
fallacies that we are all prone to, and uh, we often said during the workshop, news channels and the way news and other things happen these days, uh, one could one could sit all day and just keep finding identifying fallacy after fallacy. because they play these tricks on us. Uh, News media, all kinds of media is filled with these tricks, and we fall for it. Advertising is filled with it, and we fall for it. Just the ability to identify that you're being gamed is a superpower in the times that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that is the second part. And the third part is, uh, once we have recognized these two, that yes, I will experience emotion and it's fine. Uh, I need to learn to think more clearly, identify the critical areas that become then the structure within which I think, and uh, I learn to focus on what is known and what isn't, what is a conjecture, uh, what is a um, possibility, what does probability mean, and all of these things. Then the third aspect of it is I need to, because I live in society and engage with a lot of other people, I need to learn how to conduct a reasonable discourse on various topics and issues that concern me or those that I think are important to me with
Mm-hmm.
people around me. This is where we come to the genesis of this entire workshop, where we started thinking about this, and we actually started thinking about uh, doing such a workshop in 2021. It's about 2 years before we actually did it. And one uh, Anushka, she's a psychologist. She was an ex-student of mine. Um, Anushka and I sat on this for about 2 months. We discussed and designed it back then because we were really interested in this. And the reason we started thinking about this was we realized that we live in extremely polarized times, right? And our inability to actually engage with the other side uh, is going to be our doom, right? But the only way we can do that is if we can figure out how to work with our feelings and our thoughts, right? And then allow the other person the same space uh, and engage. Look at the facts. So, debate, for example, the way debates seem to be conducted is that the objective of a debate is to win. And I think that's an extremely stupid idea. Right? The idea of a debate should never be to win. It is not about who is right, it is about what is right. At the end of a debate, if the two people engaged in a debate are any wiser than they were when they started,
Mm. Then it was a
the
win.
debate has been won by both,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
But if the focus is only to win as an individual, and if you look at a debate as a competition, I think we have lost it. We have lost the plot completely. Because,
And that is typically how people structurally approach debating. I mean,
yeah,
even when I think about in the US, for example, when
yeah,
people think about debating, it's usually done at a classroom level or it's done in a competition level where there is a winner. And so your primary purpose is to win, less I want to learn about the opposite side.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
then you want to win at any cost, right? You want to
Yeah.
put the other person down. All kinds of things happen. Personal attacks will happen. You cherry pick your facts. You
I
deny
think
the other
about that.
person's facts.
I think about that all the time, especially when it comes to politics. Like when I was in policy school, the amount of times I would hear people discuss an issue from a place of I want to use this as an opportunity to learn was almost
Yeah,
non-existent. It did not exist. It was usually the way people would approach conversations is I know what's right. Now I am here to come impose my rightness upon you.
yeah,
And I think because I mean I think it's something Socrates said as well. Like I mean, if you really want to learn and understand another person's
mm,
argument, the best thing to do is just ask questions. I mean, to perhaps speak on your own ideas comes after you've fully taken the time to understand another person's argument. At which point,
yeah,
now that you have enough ammunition, you can kind of to say what you know to respond. I think I want to touch on this workshop and kind of the thought process you had behind the whole
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
because
yeah.
it's a well thought out idea, and I thought that all the students who were there, who were able to like sit, and it's not often, this is something that
Mm.
I've seen people try all over, right? I mean, critical thinking, we must engage critical thinking in students.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought you were the first person and organization that I've seen actually attempt to define what that looks like and create a framework of what critical thinking is. Often it's just used as a buzzword of like, we want critical thinking, but
Yeah.
it's not really
Yeah.
defined what that is. And so, one, I thought it was awesome you were able to kind of break it out into emotion and then thinking and rationale and then into, the actual communication part. And the part that I really wanted to touch on is, instead of making it be like a 1 day thing where all you do is talk about this, you chose to do it. It was 10 days, correct?
Yes, it was. Yeah,
Yeah, you
nine
chose to
days. Yes.
do a 10-day camp where this was
Yeah,
not the only thing that the kids were doing, right? I mean, we went on hikes, we were watching
yeah.
movies, we ate lunch and dinner and spent a lot of time together. It became something where these, and I have found some of the best education experiences in my life to be very similar to this, where there is a soil which is sprinkled with whatever it is that we want people to kind of pick up or embody. And then there's all the other stuff you do on top. But because it's built on that foundation, you naturally are just thinking about it throughout the entire 10 days. And so it stays with you in a much more profound way than something if I just read for 3 days in a row and I just had to move on with my life. How did you choose to, well, why did you choose to kind of approach it from that way?
Uh, First of all, because critical thinking is a very heavy thing to engage with for 10 straight days. If that's the only thing you're doing, uh, maybe only people who are interested in academics uh, might be able to do it uh, for 10 straight days. But other than that, I guess it will become very difficult for others to because at some point, uh, the mind reaches saturation uh,
Hmm.
because it is not used to constantly observing itself, because that's where it has to begin, not observing the other but observing itself. uh, you're not used to doing it, and so if you have to do it for 10 straight days, it can be very tiring, and therefore a bunch of other things. You need to give downtime for the brain, for the mind. uh, the other thing was, of course, then how do you provide that downtime? Since we live in such a beautiful place, uh, we should use that opportunity and move around and do things and allow people to have fun, so that it kind of lightens things up and people have more energy to engage. I mean, you were there when the workshop was going on, and you've seen that even after all of that, there were times when people were just tired because they thought they had to think, right? And initially, one has to think. Maybe those of us who are better at it now have been through that process much earlier. But at some point, we have in our lives, and now it has just become a natural part of who we are. It just happens automatically. But these were kids between 14 and 17, and for them it was going to be difficult. It's always going to be difficult for younger people, but it is also a time where they can learn some of these things faster, because they have not yet developed very strong views on things. They are still open to uh, looking at the opposite view and examine it a little bit more than typically adults are. I find by 25, 26, people seem to these days have very, very strong views about things they that they become very attached to, and those views become a part of who they are as people. So that's a part of their identity. And anything that becomes a part of your identity is very difficult to let go, regardless of how rational or irrational it is. But um, young students around that age, 15, 16, 17, don't have such a well formed and very strong sense of identity. It is still developing. And I think that's the time one has to expose them to all kinds of views, all kinds of biases, let's call it that, right? So that then they can decide for themselves with a greater number of data points, greater amount of information.
Mm.
Their decisions or views are better informed, right?
Yeah, and I think
So
going about
yeah,
sorry, I think going about it through the way of fallacies is a phenomenal way, because I think, even yesterday I was in a discussion with a bunch of friends, and somebody had
mm,
kept making the argument, well, because a lot of people do something, it must be a good reason to do it, right? But it's
right.
that's like, I mean, that's a fallacy 101, where but
Absolutely.
and I, for a large majority of my life, would make arguments like that, but it's only after you really take the time to learn why an argument, even though it can make complete sense in your mind, could be fallacious, are you
Yeah,
then going to like critique other people's arguments? Otherwise, it would just completely fly by you.
absolutely. And it usually does, because um, uh, as it, while it's flying by, uh, we are also in the grip of other fallacies, right? So
Mm,
if the information that's coming at me seems to agree with me, then it must be right.
mm,
It is only when I learn to slow down and look at my own view that I also learn to and not just look at it, also be a little skeptical about it, not pessimistic about it, not cynical about it. But yes, I think this is what it is, but I'm not sure. Let's see, right? So it is important that one takes a stand at some point, right? They say, well, this is what I think, and that's a starting point. So the important thing uh, is not to say a this is what I think and this is what I will keep thinking, and that I am right because I think so, right? Or
mm,
to say this is what I think, but I'm I'm not sure. God knows, uh, I might be wrong. No, even that would be wrong. That's not helpful. Let's say not constructive enough. Maybe the better approach is, well, this is what I think. This is where I stand right now, but I'm open to changing my view. If you can
mm,
make good arguments and convince me, I'm absolutely open to changing my view, and I expect the same integrity from you. If I am able to do the same, you change your view. At the same time, I am willing to accept what I don't know, right? And if someone is able to point out, or if I notice that I seem to have made an assumption, I'm willing and I'm honest enough to state openly that I think I have made this assumption here, right? Because then that brings a lot of integrity to that conversation, and that's where we actually start moving forward with things.
mm,
When we either hold on to our own opinion too much, or when we are too underconfident about our own opinion, there is no starting point for it. No person who is unwilling to change, or who is very very underconfident of oneself, can participate in a constructive dialogue,
mm.
right? Because what point are you approaching it from,
Yeah, and
right?
you've touched on this. You've touched on this, I think, and I really liked when you did this in your workshop as well, where you're like, different students need different things. Some students need to build the confidence to be able to speak their mind, or, confidently say what they believe, while other students need to develop more of that ability to like listen and actually hear others. And based on where you are in that spectrum, different types of kind of teaching helps.
Yeah,
I liked how
absolutely.
you did that.
Yeah, there's another aspect to it actually, which is that because learning to think and thinking in this manner is a lot of mental work. one has to guard against um, becoming too engrossed in one's own mind, with one's own mind. Uh, because the risk is that then you start intellectualizing everything. But
Mm.
life is not lived in the head, it's actually lived, right? And so it's important that as people develop the ability to use their minds, uh, they are also engaged in work, in activity that keeps them grounded. Otherwise, there is literally going to be an imbalance in their whole being. People
Mm.
who are excessively mental drive everybody crazy. People who are excessively emotional drive everybody crazy, and people who just keep acting uh, uh, and are clueless about everything else, just thoughtlessly, they also drive everybody crazy, right? And maybe all of us have been at that in that spot at some point in our lives. Uh, but while we were there, we've also cursed the people who were there because we were noticing them all around us simply because we were there,
Mm.
right? So the world that you experience is a reflection of who you are at that point in time. And so it's important that earlier you said they were doing a bunch of different things while they were doing this. It is absolutely important that they did all those things, because otherwise I would have driven them straight into their heads for 10 days, and that can be very problematic. So
Mm.
they must work, they must do
Well
things, they must
said.
engage, meet other people, talk to them about just general stuff, so that they don't become they don't go out of touch with real lived experience of life, right?
100%. What you've just highlighted is what I believe to be one of the biggest issues with academia, where
Yeah,
you're kind of
yeah,
just you're separated from the rest of society for years on end, just thinking.
yeah,
And I have found it in many ways also to just come back, to be able to
yeah,
fit in, to be able to not be intellectualizing everything. I mean, because there
yeah,
is a part of, and this is one thing I think a lot about when it comes to what is good education. A big part of it is your ability to fit and adapt to the surrounding that you're in. If you've become so intellectual that you're no longer capable of fitting into different environments, I think that form of education has also failed you. And so,
yes, yes.
yeah, so what you're saying, 100%. So I guess like the next thing that I'm kind of curious to move on to, before, I think the cool thing is that you left Sayadri, and we spoke about
Hmm.
that on the previous episode. If any of the listeners are interested in hearing about that
Hmm.
experience, and you chose. So, what was your experience like there? What was the reason you left and you wanted to start Srot?
Uh, so I left because I'd been there for quite some time by then, so several years, and there was a growing feeling within me that if some of these educational principles are the right ones, and they seem to be the right ones, which is that education is more humane, that we don't make competition the soul of education, uh, and people will compete, and that's fine. I'm not, I don't judge competition as such, but it shouldn't be the focal point of education where you're constantly trying to outdo somebody else, right? And neither should memorization be the focal point of education, and a whole bunch of other things that Sayatri um, uh, upheld as principles, let's say. Right? The intent of the school was oriented that way. If those principles were the right ones, then I felt that most schools that think on these lines seem to cater to only those who can pay.
100%.
But why should uh, the right idea of education be limited to uh, people with deep pockets?
Hmm.
There has to be a way to bring these ideas to those who can't afford them because they need them as well, right? And this was the thought that I was working with. There was, of course, one other thing that idea that I was working with, which was I found or I felt that many people who left school or college mm, seemed completely unprepared for life. And I'm not specifically talking about Sahyadri, generally in the world around. I feel a lot of people are very, very unprepared for life. Uh, Even basic stuff they don't know. They don't know how the banking system works. They don't know how to work with their own money. Uh, they can't do a lot of things that they really need to know how to do at all. It's like they want to be independent, but they're clueless. And so, you know, a sense of independence develops with a growing sense of ability and capacity to face things, to face life.
Hmm.
And I felt that that sense was lacking. And so while people wanted to be independent, they weren't quite. And they were struggling more than they would like, more than anybody else would like them to, right? And so it seemed to me that education, so-called education, had left out the education aspect of it out of the picture and focused only on the training part, because you're never educated in mathematics or science or language or social sciences or anything. You are trained in these subjects. You're taught the alphabet, then you're taught words, and then you're trained to use those words to make sentences and paragraphs and communicate. So you learn, you're trained to communicate, right? You're trained to manipulate and work with numbers, and that's mathematics, and you're trained to work with certain other things. It's just training, and training can be done outside in, right? But education cannot be done outside in. Education has to be inspired by the educator in the student, so that the student discovers things, and the student
Hmm.
retains the ability to be curious and ask questions, and ask good questions, by the way, not nonsense, but ask good questions, uh, and become independent in that way. Because if you are only going to produce compliant individuals, uh, you haven't educated them at all. It's training, right? You train a dog as well to take orders and obey them, and you're training people to do the same. What's the difference, right?
Hmm.
And so there had to be some intervention or some program or offering that students between 17 and or let's say young adults as well, 17 and 25, can access, so that they can take a pause, reflect on life that they have lived so far, think about the life that they would like to live, right? See what they understand, what they don't, what they would like to know, what they need to know, right? And just learn to have a perspective towards things, because it's the perspective that will decide your experience. It's not your paycheck that might ensure comfort, right? uh, you might make a lot of money, you'll be very wealthy, but we have a lot of wealthy people who are miserable in their lives. So wealth is not going to do it for you, right? You can have all the things that you desire, and that is not going to do anything for you. At the end of the day, you need to know how to be happy, how to be at peace with yourself, uh, and that you can learn even when you don't have a lot of things. So
Hmm.
perspective really matters, right? And that has to be a part of education. So even here, when we work with these kids, we tell them, well, you must work hard and you must do well. And yes, it is important to make a good living. Great. But don't forget, what makes life worth living, right? In their entire drive to achieve and succeed, whatever that means, don't forget what will allow you to value your success or achievement, right? Uh, and I felt that urban society seems to have driven itself to a point there, but rural society has not come there yet. And if something can be done to prevent them from falling in the same hole, after which they will struggle to come out again, then why not? So something has to be attempted. And what we are doing here for the last 3-4 years is that attempt.
So what is it exactly that Srot does?
We started it, and we continue to offer after school support for students, because that is what students and parents here locally demand and require. Uh, there is it's a annual status of education report is published every year in India by a private organization, and we've been going through these reports. The report this year has thrown up some absolutely stunning stuff. Some of it disastrous. So the report that they published in 2019 showed that Himachal was the third best state in the country as far as education, literacy, and all that is concerned, numeracy and literacy and so on. And then we went through the data for Himachal, and the data was abysmal. Over 50% of class 5 kids or something like that, class 7 kids, could not read class 2 English textbook. A similar percentage couldn't do, about 20% of students in class 9 could not do class 5 level mathematics, 25% or so, right? And that was a statewide data. So that includes all the districts. Where we are, possibly the figures are worse. And we realized that that was the need here. That because the ability to do some of these things better is also going to give them a sense of capacity and confidence. We cannot go around telling them that, you know, all of this is a waste and they need to think about other things and so on. No, if that's what you can't go around telling a hungry man that he needs to have perspective towards life. You first feed him, right? So we started with an after school program, and what we made sure, however, while we did it, was that the children really enjoyed learning what they were learning, whether it was maths or English, two things that we primarily focus on. That they did not experience fear of punishment, and that they felt free to try and make mistakes, because mistakes are in the conventional system the worst things you can make. But nobody on this earth has ever learned anything without making a mistake. So if you reprimand and punish people harshly for making mistakes over a period of time, they simply lose the ability to take initiative and do anything on their own, because your primary objective is to not be scolded or hit or whatever, retribution. And there are great ways to avoid it. If you just copy somebody else's work, if you just get someone else to do it for you, someone who can always do it right, or you copy it from guidebooks and other resource books, you never make a mistake, and so nobody ever shouts at you, and you feel happy. And then after that, you can just memorize and go for exams and score really well, and people around you think you're very smart. And essentially, the world seems to be uh, fooled by you, but effectively you have fooled yourself, and then you fall for that same story. So as long as you're fooling others with a story that's it's nothing admirable but still okay, if you fall for your own lie, you are a fool, right? But that is what seems to happen, right? With a very um surprisingly large number of people on earth. They
Mm.
fall for their own story, right? And so that was happening. So I said, okay, first we have to get them out of that fear, so that they can try and they can see things and they don't mind taking initiative. And uh, if they feel okay being wrong, they will also have great more courage to correct that error. So kids who come, uh, invariably we have seen they start enjoying what they're doing more. They also therefore start understanding things better, because young kids can also see that when they're very scared, they don't understand what's going on. There's no chance they learn anything if they're in the grip of fear. So that's what we do. Along with
Yeah.
this, we try and make sure that we can organize workshops um, for them in different areas of interest or fields of study. We have had people who've come here to do lateral thinking, somebody who has come to do basic computers and digital literacy, financial literacy, art therapy, just art for a month. Kids doing art after their exams, a whole lot of things. Uh, a basics of business workshop is happening from the 11th of February this year, this month. Um, an environment, somebody who does EVS workshops and all, environmental sciences workshops and so on.
Mm.
That lady is going to be here towards the end of February for a month. So she will work with the kids in and connect environment and life. And their science textbooks are basically EVS textbooks at up to class 5 and 6. So she'll connect all of those dots for them, because children need to learn how to join the right dots. Otherwise, they will join dots whatever makes sense to them. They'll join all those dots, and very often it they are the wrong ones. So the idea is that she helps them connect the right ones. There's somebody who's coming towards the end of February who will do with older students, college students, and so on, a workshop in basic legal literacy, understanding the legal system and how it works. What are the laws that some of that people need to know? Laws against all kinds of exploitation and harassment, and how to work with the police, because people are typically
Mm.
scared of the police, right? Uh, so if they learn how to deal with it and what are the ways in which you must not deal with the police, uh, that should make them more confident. If at all they have to ever go to the police station and talk to someone, um, they know, right? And knowledge is power. It puts you at ease. So all kinds of things, because that exposure is critical.
Yeah.
Maths and English are important, fine, but there's a lot more happening in life apart from maths and English. So we try to do that for these
And
children, because they don't have the opportunity, they don't have the exposure. So we try to create that space and the opportunities for them.
yeah, no, that's amazing. I think one thing that would be really cool to see, and I want to search after this conversation whether it already exists, but an entire list of very not so broad like oh critical thinking, but very specific. Like if you're like okay, someone's ability to understand legality, and then like 10 bullet
Mm,
points under that. Someone's ability to understand what financial health is, and then 10 things under that. It would be really
mm,
cool to have like a comprehensive list of what all the things that are needed.
mm.
And the thing is, math and English and whatever, I mean, language is the foundation upon which any of these can be built, right? I
Yes,
mean, if you don't have a
yes,
strong grasp of language, you won't be able to communicate, you won't be able to read well.
yes,
There's same
right.
with math, like your ability to understand numbers, data, statistics improves your ability to do all these other things in life. And so when you look at math just as one thing in itself, I feel like then you miss the power and beauty of it. The power and beauty of math is that it can be applied in every other aspect of your life, which is what I think you were talking about earlier, which is connecting the dots, right? How do you connect
Absolutely.
my ability to, understand law to math? I mean, and that only
Yeah.
a really, critical person who kind of thinks about how whatever they study connects to everything else can really do that, which is why I want to say one thing which I think is really important, especially with some of the work that you're doing, is that often I think what ends up happening, and I see this happen in the US all the time, where
Mm.
people hyper fixate on the content being taught.
Mm.
And they say, okay, this is what's really important. It's really important to nail down the content of what's being taught.
Yeah.
But what I'm realizing, like after being around you, is even if what you're doing is an after school program, and people could ask, okay, well, isn't that similar to what they're learning in school? The difference is that they're around people like you, and they're around people who think like you as well, and have this
Yeah.
deeper desire for knowledge and learning, that even if it is
Yeah.
learning the same math that they're learning in school just after,
Yeah.
it's now with
Yeah.
this extra twist of like, how can
Yes.
you apply it to the rest of your life? And so
Yes.
much more what I realized through the spending time with you is that if the teacher themselves is somebody who's like really, explored knowledge and tried to find out what, these more meaningful philosophical questions, it doesn't matter what they teach.
Mm.
What anything that they teach comes embedded with all these other lessons as well. And so
Mm.
it could
Mm.
be the exact same thing that's taught in school, but it will now have a different twist because of the questions that's being asked, because of the freedom that the students have. And so
Yeah.
it's equally important to focus on who's doing the teaching, not only on what's being taught. And I think that's something I learned a lot being around you. But yeah, I really wanted to thank you for sharing so much of your experiences. I feel like there was so much more to get
Thank
into,
you.
but in
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
hour and some change conversation, I'm glad we were able to get into all that we could.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is really good work, and I'm excited. What do you see to be the future in what's a 5 year, if you have one, 5 year plan for Srot and your work?
I think so. The idea, apart from all of the stuff that we're doing, one of the things that we are focusing on is that locals have to be empowered to do these things for themselves. And so developing local teachers is a very important part of what we do. We have three teachers who've now been working with us for some time. Uh, and we are looking at training three more uh, starting tomorrow. So it's very important that the local human resource is trained, clear-minded, has the right ideas, um, is kind-hearted to hold hands of students here and walk with them. Right. Um, Over time, that thing should ideally translate to uh, a formal educational institution, which can then show others how things can be done, even in a let's say formal setup or framework, and in a rural area, that it's possible to do the same things that uh, more established alternative schools with far greater resources and students coming from urban centers can do. Same thing can be done in a rural area uh, while accounting for and customizing for the local context. Uh, and it can have a great impact, positive impact on the lives of students and people here. Right? Uh, that can definitely be done. We would like that to happen. We're working towards it. Once we have a solid uh, set of teachers, it's not obviously necessary that all the teachers who work with us for a certain period of time learn some of these things, that they have to work with us. No, if somebody wants to work independently, they are welcome to. It's great. that they would like to do that. But we are hoping that some of them will stay on, and we can build something like that with them, so that they can impact the future of the place and fortunes of students around them.
Wow. Yeah, well, thanks for sharing your view. I am really excited to, and I'm really excited to share a lot of the work that you guys do. And if other people
Thank you.
are interested in also joining, what is a way that they can get in contact with you?
They can volunteer with us. They can come here, stay, share their time, expertise, or just be here and learn, and do a retreat if they wish to. Uh, yeah, they could contribute materially, uh, or in other ways, so donations and so on. Of course, we are not yet eligible for foreign currency, but yeah, any support, help with networking, all kinds of things.
Definitely.
You could write to us. You could write to
Yeah,
us and get in touch with us with your ideas and things, and we'll be more than happy. And of course, anybody who's interested in the workshops that we do, please join. You're welcome to. Uh, I'm sure people coming in from different parts of the world will bring different perspectives, and that will be a very good thing for all other participants as well.
definitely. And I feel like it would be, I had such a huge learning experience just being in that forest and being around everyone there. It was amazing. But yeah, I'll definitely link the website and your contact information on the bio for this episode. But yeah, thank you. And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.